Buenos dias. You don't know Buenos dias? Bonjour, that's what you want? That's about all you get. All right, we are going to be in the book of Esther this morning. We are going to Esther. Man, talk about a book. Am I right?
Yeah. I deep dived it yesterday.
You deep dived the whole thing?
Esther, yeah.
Did you finish it?
Well, I read it.
Well, okay.
Well, see, Mom got me, I have a Dixon study Bible.
Oh, yeah.
I opened that up and I'm thinking,
You're not a real member of the Church of Christ unless you know what a Dixon Bible is. I'll tell you what.
I still need to pull this out.
I remember my mother-in-law, my future mother-in-law, my future father-in-law, so Melissa's mom and dad, they had the ones from back in 1960. We had real Christianity, you know? Maybe it's an inside joke that I don't know about. Anyway, but they had one each, and they used that to teach me as a new convert about what being Christian was. And so I wanted to. They had two copies, one to use and one to keep forever. So I wanted to buy the one that they wanted to keep forever, and they didn't sell it to me. And then when I moved here, George and Melanie Turner gave me one. So it took me 15 years to finally get my hands on one, but I've got one in my library right now. So they didn't have any idea about my history with the Dixon Bible.
Is it in the library up here?
It's in my personal office behind a lock and key. Why you want to know, Faye? Who? You can get those rebound, for sure. I've got one from 1886 in my office that I had rebound. And if you find a good binder, there's one here that Jim Kerr knows. If you've got a Bible that's fallen apart and you want to keep it, they can fix it up. So. Jim Kerr is the guy that knows the archivist in Macon. So, yeah. All right, Esther. So here's the deal. What we normally do, if you've been into this class before, got a couple of visitors, so I'll just give you the blanket statement. If you normally come to this class, you know, but when we go to a new book of the Bible, what's the thing I like to do first? Show the video. If you're a visual learner like me, it helps to kind of see things from a bird's eye view. TheBibleProject.com is not affiliated with our particular congregation in any type of way, but the people that are in charge of it, I think, do a very good job theologically to show you what the book's all about. And so there's not a whole lot of doctrine in there. It just gives you an overview of what the book that we're studying looks like if you look at the chapter breakdown and so on. So it's a little cartoon that shows you what the book's all about. Okay, so I would normally show that to you at the beginning before we go into the text. Here's the problem with Esther. So Esther is Shakespearean, right? We are going through Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. All the characters and players are dialoguing here. It's the most play-written book we have in Scripture. And so when you look at the video, it's 11 minutes long, from the Bible Project about Esther, if you know the book, then you're like, oh yeah, I remember all this. If you don't know the book, it kind of spoils the whole process of uncovering and unfolding the book in our own study. So it's kind of one big spoiler for what the book is, what happens in the book, and then kind of how it's arranged to show us this range of people that are one way and then another way, and things get twisted and turned. So it's kind of like if you get all that from the video, it kind of ruins the experience of going through it verse by verse the way that we would like to. So here's the plan. Lord willing, and the creek don't rise, we're going to go through the book, have some questions, talk about the dynamics within the actual story itself, the narrative itself. We'll make some comments along the way, obviously. And then at the end of the book, when we kind of wrap it all up, then I'll show you the video and you'll see kind of what the book's all about. Because he says a couple things that I've never considered before in the video that would be helpful, I think, to you in your own personal study, but I don't want to ruin it quite yet. Does that make sense? Everybody lost? Great. That's my goal. Okay, Esther. Real quick, get some stuff out of the way. Who wrote the book of Esther? That's the right answer. We don't know. We don't know anything about it. How many versions of Esther are there? You can answer and be wrong. I'll help you along the way. I don't know. It's a good answer. What? Oh, okay, let me say this. If you go back to the original language, what's the original language in which the book of Esther was written? Hebrew. Okay, it's a pretty good question. Old Testament, probably Hebrew. It's a good guess, right? Do we have any other versions of the book of Esther? Maybe not in Hebrew. Hey, good guess. Yes, we've got a Greek version. The Greek version is a lot of fun. It's in particular Bibles that have the apocryphal books or the deuterocanonical books, if you want to be really fancy and use a $15 word. You got one of those? I know you do. I've got one too, but guess what? It's gone missing. So if you happen to see that Bible I was talking about the last 3 weeks around, let me know. But it's in there. We have the Greek version of Esther. So are there differences between those two versions? Yes, there are. You have the Hebrew one that we're looking at here. This one is like the original, the OG, I was going to say, but I realized that this is probably not the class for that, but it's the original. It's the one that is accepted widely by all the Jewish scribes, even the Christians in the 1st and 2nd and 3rd century, because they were borrowing it from their Hebrew Bibles. So you have the one we're going to study is the one that's kind of the classic. The Greek version is interesting because you've got like the second part of Esther, I suppose. They insert more paragraphs into the book of Esther, not just at the end, but interspersed throughout in the Greek. And we can tell it's not the same book per se because the additions don't really help us a whole lot, and they're not as old as the Hebrew. So someone just wrote other parts of the book of Esther in Greek and then just said, hey, I guess it's Esther, right? One of the big problems here about the book of Esther, there's like one super cool fun fact about this book. What's the one fun fact about Esther? Does not talk about God at all, right? And so we don't have we don't have a spiritual view of what God's doing. We don't really have anything in reference to Jehovah God. It's just a narrative, a story about a girl and a king and her uncle and all these people. But we don't have God showing up specifically in detail in the book until we kind of step back away from the end of the book and go, well, where was God? Well, he's all the way throughout this book. It's just not explicit. So what the Greek version of Esther does, can you guess? It throws God in there because you can't have a book of the Bible that doesn't talk about God. So that's kind of what the Greek version of Esther does, is it adds stuff and then throws in information about God to make sure it's a really good Bible book. Okay? So is the Greek version of Esther the Word of God inspired by the Holy Spirit of God? No. It's just what a scribe added to the story to kind of make it fit his theology. Right? You with me on that? Okay, so if you look up the book of Esther in your personal Bible that you're carrying, 99.9% of you will have this version that we're going to be studying today. If you happen to have one maybe in your library, that's a Catholic Bible or a Methodist Bible or Episcopalian Bible, you might have two different versions of Esther. It's interesting to read if you think like me, which no one does. So I think it's interesting to read, what did this scribe think was so lacking in the original Hebrew version of Esther that he had to make additions to it? Because a couple times in the Bible, they're like, don't add to or take away from. This guy thought it was important enough to add to it. What did he think was so special? And then you read, you're like, that's it? It's not that, okay, sure. But you have two different versions, long story short. Or long story long, I guess. Okay. Any questions or comments about the intro? We don't know the author. We don't really know when it was written. It would make sense, Second Temple period when they come back from captivity. So like timeline of Ezra and Nehemiah, like maybe short after that. They're like, oh, here, by the way, here's this girl named Esther, which is why we have a 2-day feast of Purim to celebrate the fact that we all didn't die. That's pretty cool, right? So that's probably the time from which it was written. Originally written in Hebrew, there was a Greek edition. Anything else? That makes the most sense. Joseph? Yeah. Yeah, so that's the kind of the main point of the book, right? That despite circumstance and lacking explicit information from God's Holy Spirit about why God puts people in specific situations, although it ends up looking like God is glorified, the people are protected, God keeps His promises. All of these stories, I mean, including Ruth, she just happened to go to Boaz's field to glean that day, right? So all these circumstantial things in these lives, obviously we stand back from that and look back at that and say, well, yeah, God had His plan in effect, and He was moving and working in these people's lives through coincidence, we would say. And everything just works out for God's people and to glorify God as the creator of the universe. But it's not explicit. So we'll get there when we get to the middle of the book, right? Okay, let's begin reading. I'm going to be reading from the ESV. You pick your own translation as you see fit. Okay, Esther chapter 1, verse 1. Every good Bible book begins with when it was written, kinda, right? So you have a rough time frame. Here it is. Now in the days of Ahasuerus, the Ahasuerus who reigned from India to Ethiopia over 127 provinces, in those days when King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne in Susa, the citadel, in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a feast for all his officials and servants. The army of Persia and Media and the nobles and governors of the province were before him. We'll pause right there. So, who is King Ahasuerus? What? Xerxes. Okay, if you've seen the movie 300, he probably didn't look like how he's portrayed in the movie 300. Okay? But he was the king or emperor over the Medo-Persian Empire. So you have the Assyrians, and they fell to the Babylonians, and then the Babylonians fell to the Medo-Persian Empire. So the Medes and the Persians got together, made an empire, conquered Babylon. So this is kind of the big bad empire of the time, if you will, and the Israelites are in captivity in the Medo-Persian Empire. The Babylonian Empire, if you'll remember the one right before them, they got the north, but they couldn't touch the south. That's that whole story about Sennacherib going down to Jerusalem, and he writes in his histories, I had the king of the Israelites shut up like a bird in a cage in his city. That might ring a bell with some of you. That's that, and then they all woke up dead. Apparently you can do that biblically, you can wake up dead. And so the Babylonians got the northern tribes of Israel, they didn't get Jerusalem in the south. Now the Medo-Persian Empire, they came in there and they took everybody back. So they took the captives back to the Medo-Persian Empire. Ahasuerus, a.k.a. Xerxes, okay? His father, Darius or Darius, however you want to pronounce that, is the one that kind of began this whole deal. So he's the second king in control. Questions about that? What empire is after the Medo-Persian Empire historically? Yeah, the Greeks, you get this guy named Alexander, and he's like the best in the world because he names every city in the world after him, which is not confusing for us at all. So you say Alexandria. We're like, okay, cool, which one? There's 5, right? So it's usually the one in Egypt, but so you have Medo-Persian Empire falling to the Greek Empire, and then after that you got Rome. So you got Jesus and Paul, right? By the way, all of that historical evidence of the empires that reigned and so on, that is the end of the book of Daniel. He saw a great statue, and there's segments, divisions in the statue. You've got every single major world empire, including Rome, talked about then. And under the Roman part of that statue is I see someone like the son of David being born, and that's going to be pretty cool, right? And he's way back here in captivity for the Medo-Persian Empire and Babylonians. So, I mean, some of you love history, some of you despise it. If you're one of those despise history people, that's fine. Just know that we're kind of right here in the middle of this historically. If you love it, then you know more than me about it, right? Okay. Questions, comments? We all confused? That's my goal. Okay. All right. Medo-Persian Empire is the biggest, baddest one biblically until Alexander comes along, and then we've got Rome. So we're kind of towards the tail end, if you will, of captivity here for the Israelites. Okay. In the third year of his reign, he gave a feast for all his officials and servants, the army of Persia and Media, and the nobles and governors of the provinces were before him. So he's throwing a big party. And this is a big party. He's inviting all his officials, all his governors, all his princes to come and party with him because they're doing a great job of ruling over the world and making everybody upset because they're in charge. Right? Okay. While he showed the riches of his royal glory and the splendor and pomp of his greatness for many days, namely 180 days. I'm going to have a party. It's going to last 180 days to see how rich and cool I am. That's this guy's plan. So we might make some assumptions about his character, okay? Let's do that. If you are so powerful and so rich, you're like, the best thing to do is display how rich and powerful I am for a 180-day party. What do you assume about the guy? He's a little full of himself. He thinks a lot about himself. He's so cool. Now, what's interesting in the text thus far is we're already assigning characteristics to certain players in this story, this dynamic. So you kind of get a feel for who he is at the beginning based on how he's introduced. What's going to be interesting is at the tail end of the book, there's going to be some dinner feast going on, a small affair, and his demeanor, his character, his attitude seems to shift. And when we get there, I'll talk about historically why his character seemed to shift from thinking he is the best in the world to maybe he's a little bit more humbled. Because if you know Thermopylae, then you'll know exactly why he might have been humbled. It's because he's the greatest and he's the best, but you've got like 1,000 people defeating his army. Weird. So maybe he's not that great. We'll get there in due time. Okay. And when these days were completed, so he partied for 180 days, the king gave for all the people present in Susa, the citadel, the main capital city, both small and great, a feast lasting 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace. So after he partied with his leaders for 180 days, you know what? Let's bring out the peasants too. Okay? Everybody can have a party for 7 days. We had 180, they can have 7. That's the plan. There were white cotton curtains and violet hangings fastened with cords and fine linen and purple to silver rods and marble pillars, and also couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and precious stones. Drinks were served in golden vessels of different kinds, and the royal wine was lavished according to the bounty of the king. And drinking was according to this edict. There is no compulsion, for the king had given orders to all the staff of his palace to do as each man desired. Queen Vashti also gave a feast for the women in the palace that belonged to King Ahasuerus. So he wasn't going to force you to drink what you didn't want to drink. That's going to make for a bad time at a party, right? If you drink too much, it's going to ruin the party. It's lasting 180 days. Definitely, it's going to be a really bad hangover if you make everyone drink what you're going to drink. Back in the day, when it comes to this kind of drinking, you would have toasts that were offered. That's when you were required to drink from it. So the idea here is if they were offering a toast to how great the king is or the ruler here at this time, you would be forced to finish your wine that you had in that cup for every toast. There's a lot of toasts going on to how great this guy is. Everyone's going to have a bad time the next morning, right? And so that's kind of the idea here, is they were not drinking to just get wasted. They were drinking to celebrate how great their empire was and how great their king was, and so they were allowing people to actually enjoy it instead of just have the ceremony of the toasting going on. Okay, questions? Do we have any moral questions about whether or not this is a good idea? I mean, we're getting the facts, just the facts here at the beginning of the text of what was going on.
Did you pay everybody's bills for 6 months?
It seems like it, right? I mean, if you're that rich, you're like, here's the plan, guys. You can stay with me for a while. We'll just eat and drink well for 180 days.
Just a show.
I mean, flaunt it if you got it, I guess. I don't know. Okay, verse 10. On the seventh day, so when everybody's had this party now to enjoy, when the heart of the king was merry with wine. Anyone need to comment on that? Or are we all grown-ups? Oh, okay, there we go. You make the best decisions when you're inebriated, right? Was that your experience? Yeah, okay, here we go. He commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha. I mean, imagine that's your name. Bigtha. And Abagtha, Zethar, and Carcass, the 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of King Ahasuerus, to bring Vashti before the king with her royal crown in order to show the peoples and princes her beauty, because she was lovely to look at. There's a small thing mentioned in the middle clause of verse 11 that you may or may not be aware of already. So this guy, if you look at verse 10, part A, the second clause, he's making a decision because he's inebriated. And his big plan is, I got the prettiest wife, y'all. So what I'm going to do is call for the eunuchs that serve her and have her come out and just show you guys how pretty my wife is. I'm just the greatest. I've got this wealth, things are going well, we're in control of everything as far as we know, and I've got the prettiest wife in the world. Let me just bring her out and show her off. The thing that you may or may not know about in verse 11 is it's kind of a subtle, it's in a way kind of like what you have with covering one's feet. It's a euphemism, slang. It's the idea of you say it and you should kind of know what's meant, right? Talked about that in detail ad nauseum. In Ruth, the idea of covering your feet means to relieve oneself because you're covering your feet with your garments that you're wearing on your lower part of your body. So when it says in verse 11 that his command was to bring out Queen Vashti with her royal crown, what's the implication? Yeah?
That's her only thing she should have.
That's it. Bring her out wearing her crown. Nothing else. Because she is the prettiest woman in the entire world. Put that royal crown on her and parade her out here in front of all these drunk guys. So we've made a judgment on the...
say that you read in this that she used to come out butt naked except for the crown.
That's right.
I don't know how you get that out of this verse.
Okay, if you look at the Hebrew,
I don't have the Hebrew.
I'm telling you, that's why I'm here. Is to help you see the things that are not that clear. Now, would you... Okay, if you read in the Scriptures the idea that someone covered their feet in a cave, what would you glean from that?
Relieving themselves.
Okay, does that make sense then? Because if it's just her coming out to show off how beautiful she is in her gown, in her crown, we're not going to have what we have here in just a couple verses. So let's keep reading. Then the king, verse 12, but Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command delivered by the eunuchs. why in the world would this queen offer her head up to her ruler husband to come out to show off how pretty she is unless the request was inappropriate and something she didn't want to do? She is risking having her head being chopped off by this guy who's been partying and is drunk now around all these people. She says, I wonder why. Well, okay. At this, the king became enraged. Now, it just so happens that today we're talking about love, as we've been doing all month, and we're talking about the love between a husband and a wife. And we just happen to be introducing Esther in this particular morning, and so you've got a husband and wife dynamic here that's less than healthy, to say the very least. The king became enraged. His anger burned within him. The king said to the wise men who knew the times, for this was the king's procedure towards all those versed in law and judgment. The men next to him were being Karshena, Shethar, Admah, Tarshish, Meres, Marsena, and Mukaman, the 7 princes of Persia and Media, who saw the king's face and sat first in the kingdom, because he's being embarrassed in front of all his second-in-command guys here. According to the law, what is to be done to Queen Vashti because she has not performed the command of the king Ahasuerus delivered by the eunuchs? So he's upset. He gives a command to his wife, come out here and show these guys how pretty you are. She says, no thanks. And he goes, okay, lawyers, what can I do about this? Right? Then Mehuman said in the presence of the king and the officials, not only against the king has Queen Vashti done wrong, but also against all the officials and all the people who were in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For the queen's behavior, not obeying her husband here in this case, and his command as king, will be made known to all women, causing them to look at their husbands with contempt, since they will say, King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti be brought before him, and she didn't do it. This very day, the noble women of Persia and Media who have heard of the queen's behavior will say the same to all the king's officials, and there will be contempt and wrath in plenty. So they're going, she is setting an unheard of precedent. If the king can't make the queen do something, what kind of king is he? It's embarrassing to him and to all the men who are in charge here in this empire, this evil empire, mind you. And here's a suggestion. If it please the king, let a royal order go out from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that that it may not be repealed, that Vashti is never again to come before King Ahasuerus. Let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she. So we've got some historical context here in verse 19 that's important to know for the narrative of the story, for the beats of the story that will come. If something is written in the law of the Medes and the Persians, what may not happen? Cannot be changed, cannot be overruled. If they write it in the law books, that is there forever. Right? That's important to know for later. If you know the story already, you know why I'm emphasizing that. If you don't, then there's a surprise coming, right? Here we go. So, when the decree was made by the king, is proclaimed throughout all his kingdom, because it's vast, how big your kingdom is great. All women will give honor to their husbands, high and low alike. So here's the deal. He is drunk on wine after a bender of at least 7 days, if not 180 days. In his great drunk wisdom, he's like, here's what we should do, guys. Have my Queen Vashti come out and show you how pretty she is. Make sure she's wearing her crown. She says, no, I'm not going to do that for whatever reasons. We have to look at the text and see why would she refuse the king's command, because she might lose her life. If you look there again in the Hebrew, we have the implication from the rabbis that they are saying that's what she was to be wearing, and only that. That would make sense to me as to why she would refuse to show her beauty off for his friends that are there at the party.
Harkening back to that,
Yes.
does the Hebrew say that she came out or was to come out with nothing on but the crown.
What was she supposed to be wearing?
Duh,
What was she supposed to be wearing?
what a queen would normally wear.
When the king says, bring my pretty wife out here to see how beautiful she is, what was she to wear?
Well, when she's just around the house, she wouldn't have her crown on.
Go get her crown on, make sure she's wearing that, and then bring her out.
Does it say in the Hebrew that she was wearing nothing but the crown?
Why else would she refuse to come out then? Is the
Well, maybe it's
question.
because she was ticked off at her drunk husband and wanted to show off.
Yeah, you can be mad at your drunk husband all you want. That is an interpretation, is that she just refused because that was the order of her wearing that and nothing else. If you don't like that interpretation, you want to go and do your own research into it, feel free. This is not a point of contention for me at all. If you think that's not what the text is saying, that's okay. She still refused. The fact of the matter is, this is the issue. That's fine. But I will say, everyone that I think of as authoritative when talking about this text, that's the implication from the language, is they're saying what she should be wearing, and clothes isn't on that list. So again, that's just a point of contention. Whatever the case, that's the deal, is she's going to be kicked out of the king's protection, of his household, of his family, and she's going to lose everything because of this guy, his arrogance and his pride and his advisors showing him what he should do to teach her a lesson and all the women in his kingdom a lesson. That's not obviously what God intended or desired for his people. And the Israelites that are in captivity are learning morals from this guy because they rejected God's morality in the law. That's kind of big picture for us. They're now living in this world where this is fine, this is okay, because God gave them up because they would not stop practicing idolatry and allowing God to be their God. They rejected that, and this is the place where they find themselves. Okay, Ted.
Distressing parallel, I don't know if anybody's seen, I've seen just the headlines, was Kanye parading his wife out. Basically, he literally...
Listen, Ted, I love you, but I'm not talking about Kanye this morning. I've done a lot of things
I'm just saying the
to
situation
illustrate. I'm not talking about Kanye. I can't do it.
I'm just saying, it's total terrible.
I just can't do it.
So
All
if she
right.
did do it, it would work, because that situation doesn't work.
All right, enough of Kanye. Sorry, Ted. I got to cut you off there. All right, chapter 2.
Can I say one thing?
If it's about Kanye, no. Okay. Okay. I just can't do it. I will chase more rabbits about Kanye than anybody else. But okay, go ahead.
It doesn't say naked, but you're saying the Hebrew says naked.
No, it's not saying naked. The king gave a command of what she was to wear when he is parading how beautiful and attractive she is to her second-in-command guys. It seems to be implied in the text that that is what she is to wear.
Well, I just assume when you go before the king, you wear clothes, but he says wear your crown. Okay, that's true. But
Again, if you disagree, if you don't see it in the text, that's fine. It doesn't matter to me. I'm just saying, when you read about this, you will find that talked about. So I didn't want to leave you.
I was just wondering if there was a surprise in the Hebrew. That's all.
No. This is primitive Hebrew. It's not as flowery and descriptive as Greek would be later on. But when you look at it, it's saying what she is to wear to show off her beauty and attractiveness to her guys. He's drunk, making a terrible decision here of trying to embarrass her in front of all of them. What would be so embarrassing about her coming out to say, yeah, I'm the prettiest girl in the world, the king is my husband? Why would she refuse and be willing to suffer the penalty of possibly the execution by refusing the king's command? What would make her do that? Well, because there's a little issue here about what she was to wear. She didn't seem to like that too much. Why is that the case? So again, that's just an interpretation. You don't have to believe that if you don't want to. Yeah.
Until this happened, she was partying with the rest. She had her own feast that she held. So she was partying with them. To this point in time, there was something that caused her
So they were
to
all
refuse.
There's something significant that happened that caused her to refuse the king's command. We'll learn when we introduce who Esther is and who she becomes, that there are certain consequences if you do things that upset the king. And you have to be willing to endure those consequences if you refuse the king. It's a whole dinner party situation that will happen later. And if you go and present yourself to the king without him specifically calling for you, what is the consequence that Esther knows about later? Death. And Esther says, if I die, I die. She's not quoting Rocky there. Rocky got it from her, right? She's saying, I understand if I do this thing that's against the custom of what my king wants, I may be executed. Queen Vashti has been in the situation for longer than Esther was, it seems from the text. And she's commanded to go out there and parade her beauty around. And she says, I'm not doing it. Why would she say that if it's just go out there and say, look at my face, it's beautiful? That's where we're all coming from for those that say, well, the crown was specifically ordered for her to wear. Why would she refuse that? Just a thing to know. Again, if you don't want to go down that road, you don't have to. I don't lead you down that path. It's not our salvation. I'm just saying if you look at the interpretations, that seems to be the implication from what she was to wear. Okay, Kate. Nothing?
Well, yeah, but...
Ask the question.
Okay, I don't know anything about Esther, for everybody else. I've never read this book. The first chapter paints Xerxes in a bad light.
No way.
And that's what, so just reading that line, her coming out, just the crown, kind of makes that whole picture of this man is not good.
Yeah, he's not the kind of king God would have wanted for his people to be their king.
So that's just, you saying that after just reading into it, makes sense.
Yeah. Now, again, Esther, the book of Esther, as we talk about this guy who seems not that good according to morals from God's word, there's going to be a shift. And when that shift happens, it's interesting when it happens, when we can date that shift to take place, and who helps influence this guy to be maybe a better version of who we've met so far. Not saying he's going to be some kind of great guy ever, because he wasn't. But it's interesting to see the people that are in his lives that influence him in certain ways that maybe will change his thinking about certain things. Okay? So yeah, this dude's not great. If you've not gotten that, then hang on. Okay. After these things, chapter 2, verse 1. When the anger of King Ahasuerus had abated, what's that mean? Subsided. He sobered up, thought it over the next day, right? He remembered Queen Vashti and what she had done and what had been decreed against her. Then the king's young men who attended him said, let beautiful young virgins be sought out for the king. Let the king appoint officers and all the provinces of his kingdom to gather all the beautiful young virgins to the harem and Susa the citadel under custody of Hegai, the king's eunuch, who's in charge of the women. Let their cosmetics be given them. Let the women who please the king be queen instead of Vashti. This pleased the king, and he did so. We'll pause right there. So he thought about what was going on. He missed having a queen in his life, a beautiful Vashti, but she's already been written out of the whole situation. So he's got a servant that says, you know what we should do? We should hold a beauty competition to have all the prettiest girls in the entire empire brought before you so you can pick a new one out. Again, if you've not gotten a sense of who this dude is, he's not great. He's rich, he's powerful, he's a drunkard, he's a misogynist, he's all these things, and this is kind of the main character thus far in the book. So you've got a guy who's not great, who's looking for beautiful young women to be his new brides. And that's when we're introduced to a humble Jewish girl named Esther. Okay? We'll pick up here, Lord willing, next week, verse 5 of chapter 2. Thank you for your time and your attention. We'll be dismissed now for about 20 minutes before worship begins.